Roy Benavides was here once.
All right. We're talking today with Mr. Francisco Vega. This is our second interview where we're going to pick up from the end of the Second World War and move on from there. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. All right, Mr. Vega, in our first interview, we had basically covered your early life and your military career pretty much up to the end of the Second World War. But you have further experiences after that, both in Europe at the end of World War II and then in the period of the Korean conflict. And so we'd like to pick up the story. Basically, where were you when the war in Europe ended? Were you in France at that point still?
No, I was in Germany.
Okay.
We had been in France at Chantilly. We just moved to, we're on our way to Bad Kissingen, K-I-S-S-I-N-G-E-N, Kissingen, Germany. And on the way there, of course, we saw quite a bit of the country of France and Belgium and the different things that had been taking place, bombardments of cities.
Right.
And while in Bad Kissingen is where I then ended up going to the Ardennes on a volunteer. We had to get one of our people out of there. We had a special equipment, and it was a Type 10 equipment, which today we call satellites, and it has to be from one high point to another high point. And we were a mobile outfit. And
you had talked about doing that in our first interview.
Yes.
Because that was during the war still.
Okay.
During the Ardennes offensive, because we had to get that out of there ahead of the Germans.
Well, okay, now from there, let me just take it to the end of the war on that, when we found out that changes were being made. I was busy putting together the records. Our battalion had over 1,300 people on it. And and now we had, I think, myself and one other person. That's all, to take care of all the personnel records, 3 companies and headquarters company. So we were very busy. And I do not think that we thought it was great, but we had not seen the end of the war itself. And some of the people volunteered to go to the Pacific.
Right.
So there were more records to get ready. Then find out that we needed a certain number of points, and I had all of these records of people who had been in Africa, who had been across Northern Africa, and then into the landings in Europe. We had been in 5 campaigns. All this started coming together as the records were being put together.
Right.
And we realized, I think at one point someone said, "Do you realize how long we've been in a combat zone?" And they said 18 months, the entire time from the time we landed in Normandy right to the Ardennes, and now we're getting ready to leave on that. So I find out that I missed returning with my outfit by about 2 points.
Because your unit had already been in existence and you had joined it as a replacement. So those guys who'd been in Africa and so forth, they had more points than you, and they could all be discharged, but you're still there.
Right. And again, even with the 5 campaigns I was in, I still was missing about a couple of points. So I remember the colonel came over and he said, "I've arranged it so that you go from here to Bad Neustadt." This is a long lines company, they handle communication lines.
Right.
He said, "You won't be there long." He says, "I feel badly that you're not returning with us, but he said, just get ready to leave." That was it. So I went to Bad Neustadt, joined this outfit, and while there, I was able to see a great deal of what we call DPs, displaced people. Many of them had broken limbs that had mended crooked, they had not been set or anything. And I was there, I would say not more than 2 weeks. And then I was asked to leave, to get ready to leave. They took us to the railroad station. There were the 48 boxcars open, and I joined another bunch of guys, and we started on the train back to Le Havre. So you can see from Germany all the way to the port of Le Havre. Remember that we had no seats in there, we had no toilets, we had nothing in.
Right. And what was the weather like at that point?
Very cold.
It
was cold at that time. What we did, and of course this is again goes back to a number of things that the people, the American soldier, was so resourceful, and we picked up 5-gallon cans of gasoline, and other guys picked up some containers, put sand in them, and we would put the gasoline into the sand and light it. We were very careful because it was just an open flame, but that's the way we came all the way to the port. We get to the port, they took us to the there's different groups that they had. They call them Chesterfield Camp and different.
Right. Yeah, they had a whole bunch of camps, and they were all named after different cigarette brands for some reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then from there, they took us to the ship, and we came on the Wilson Victory. Now, these were the new Victory ships. This one was brand new. It had just arrived from the States, and I do not believe it had been used for anything yet, not a load of anything. So they put us on that, and we left Le Havre. We left France. With that, we had a very, very rough trip. This ship would go down and go up again. I'm not a Navy person or anything like that, but it would go way up and come down, and the motor would be whirling up in the air.
Right.
It was grinding away. We had on the area that we were in, there was a beam that came loose, and it just went right across the floor. And just we had a post with hammocks on the entire floor, and it just cut them like they were butter.
Right.
And again, here's the resourcefulness. We immediately grabbed our duffel bags with our equipment, and we just ran after that beam like and threw ourselves on top. Everybody just threw all this stuff on top to stop it. But then we made it through with like I say, the storm was a very bad one. But we got through, landed in Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. That's the next place I can recall. I started making phone calls. And one of the things that I was concerned about in Europe a great deal was that I wanted to get back and marry this girl I had met.
Right.
And I was more afraid of not accomplishing that part of my life than I was of getting killed there. But this is a person I married in 1946, and I was still married. But so I finally went from there to a railroad station. Well, when we got to the Camp Kilmer at the dock, I remember stepping out, and possibly 10 feet high, there were boxes of small milk bottles in carton. We had not had any milk. And we started drinking. Of course, it got many of us sick. But and then from there we went to again to the railroad station. They took us down to well, I went down to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, and things started again. Events were getting into place, and I remember getting into the railroad station in San Antonio, and this one fellow came by, and he said, "Well, I'm playing golf over the weekend. Are you going to be caddying?" It was a very quick reaction, but his lip was cut to where he had to take him right away and give him some stitches. But again, I did not feel that as a racism or anything like that. It just felt that this is not something that I wanted. I mean, so I reacted to it. Again, those were the changes that had come about. None of us had to put up with anything.
Right.
I mean, we had been tested. We had volunteered, many of us, and so then from there, I remember calling home. I arrived, and Dad said, "Are you ready to leave? Can I pick you up?" I said, "Dad, I'll take the bus. I'll get home. It's fine." I said, "I'll have a couple of days." So then they were processing us. We were at Dodd Field again, which is part of Fort Sam Houston, and I remember we're in this like four-car garage, open, and I remember that. Someone, a plane, we heard the sound of a plane, and one of the young soldiers who was there processing us yelled, you know, the plane or something, strafing, and he yelled something. Those of us hit the floor. And then they started laughing, some of the young guys. But anyway, we picked up that young guy, took him to the shower, clothes and all. But this was just an incident, an experience of the changes that were coming about, that we were still reacting on that. From there, I remember that one of the persons that was there, and he kept looking at me for a while. It was this big first sergeant, and I mean, what you would call the kind you would like to see in a movie. He had a big pot belly.
Right.
He had all the medals on and everything else, and he said hi to me, and he said, "So you made it?" And I said, "Yes." And then he had the Purple Heart on. I said, "But I was." I told him I was not dumb enough to get one of those, and we were joking. And he said, "What the heck?" I said, "What the heck did you do?" And I only have my staff sergeant chevrons on. He's a first sergeant. Of course, I had received a promotion to the sergeant major, but he said, I didn't keep my butt down. I said, you were hit there? You're joking. And by then all the other guys were just joking and talking about that. And then I said, I remember you for another reason. And I said, what's that? I said, you were the guy that put me to pack those 1-pound bags of saltpeter. And I said, we do it all the time. So this was another little incident. And from there, I remember taking I left there in the morning. I was discharged. I had my Army discharge. I went and took the bus and went home. And I arrived home, and of course the family was waiting. I called them. And I remember Mother was crying, and I thought, she's crying, she's happy. But she kept on crying for a while, and I said, Mother, I'm going to be here now. I said, I'm just in talking with the first sergeant, he asked me what I was going to do, and he said, well, are you staying in the reserve? And I said, I've been wanting to get a commission. Maybe I should do that. So I signed up for the reserve. That was the beginning of the final deal on this thing. So I get home, and then we sit down, we talked, and Mother said, well, I do have something for you. And this, by the way, is, I'm a little bit ahead of the story on this, because this is after I had been in Grand Rapids. But when I was there, I met with the family. I made a trip to Saltillo, Mexico. My aunt, Simona, and grandmother, and uncles, and aunts, and cousins were there. And my aunt Simona said, I made a promise while you were in service, that if you would come back, we would keep this promise. Now in Spanish, it's called a manda, which is almost like an order. In other words, that you have agreed to do something. So we went to the church, a sanctuary, Our Lady of Guadalupe there in Saltillo. And the promise he had made was that if I came back alive, that she and I would walk on our knees from the door of the church to the altar, which we kept on that. We did that. But again, these are just part of the cultural side, and I respected their wishes, and I was very happy that if that's what got me back, I wouldn't argue with it. You
weren't going to argue, right.
So then I returned to San Antonio, had a job right away with a Veterans Administration Adjudication Division because of my typing. And this is in January, February of '46. Had my wife and I, my girl I was going to marry, we agreed to get married in May of '46. And then we were married. We returned to San Antonio. We were married in St. Louis, Missouri. One of the fellows that landed with me at Normandy, I'll think of his name in just a moment. He's our best man. And so then we returned to San Antonio. Then we left for Grand Rapids, found a school. I wanted to go to University of Michigan, but for what reason I still do not know. I like the name, and I had been to 3 other schools before in the Army, universities. So when we could not get into U of M because every state university was giving preference to state veterans, to their state veterans. And so my wife had met the Gene Adrian's Grand Rapids family here in Chicago. While my wife was working for the Social Security Administration and living at the YWCA, and this is where Gene also lives. So they started talking about school, and she mentioned Aquinas that was just getting started. So we came up on that, and it was in September '46. This, when I left the Veterans Administration, I believe that from the time I worked with them in a few months, I received about 4 promotions, pay promotions. Because what I was doing was typing records, and of course my typing speed was there.
You were both fast, and you had a lot of experience with records by this
time
too.
So then, and with numbers, it's something else I had done just before I went into service. I had about a year and 2 years of working as a billing clerk, and there were just all numbers on that, which you would practice. I mean, anytime you just practice a letter. But anyway, so then we came up here in September of '46. In '48, I went to University of Michigan for a School of Business Administration. It was there that I met George Hartwell, the father of President Mayer, and Doris. He was just out of the Navy. I was just out of the Army. We lived next to each other at Willow Run Village and in Ypsilanti. But then we returned to San Antonio in January '51. However, my wife was working at the Grand Rapids Press at the time, at the old building down across from the Veterans Park. And there was an ad in the paper. And my wife, I called her, And she said, why do you want to apply for a job? I thought we were leaving for San Antonio. I said, well, we are. And so you said, we'll leave in January. And I said, yes. And this is October. During that last year of 1949-50, I had also, we were living in Norwood Street, and I saw a job opening at the Easttown Theater. They had a sign out there, and I went and talked to the owner at that time, it was Ellen Johnson. And he said, do you want that job? And I said, yes. I was surprised. And he said, no, says, that's a woman's job. And I said, do you pay for it? He said, yes. He said, if you don't mind, he said, I'll take it. I live right around the corner here.
Right.
So I took that. It was a big joke for a while because people were not used to that, but it was a good experience. I ended up managing the Wealthy, the Hour, the Four Star, the Family, and the Easttown. And that was a chain owned by Ellen Johnson, and I guess the film was supplied by a Detroit organization. So then in October of that year, it's when I called my wife. I said, there's a box ad in the paper, and I'd like to know what it is. And she asked me again, are we leaving for San Antonio? I said, yes. But so she said, well, it's Resurrection Cemetery of the Catholic Diocese. They're out on Lower Monroe, just about where the new buildings are now. And I went over there, and they said, look, there's a fellow, Harry. He said he's from Kansas City. He was up here helping get Resurrection Cemetery started. Resurrection being the second Catholic cemetery in the nation of no upright monuments. I knew nothing about cemetery business, but he talked to me and Harry Groff, and he said, it's commission. I said, fine. He said, now here's what you do. So you take this book, these pages, and study them. And I said, well, I have a couple of questions. He said, don't worry about the questions. The people have all the answers for you. And he had come from Kansas City. The thing is, he did not know too much about the business himself, but I believed him. He was in charge. From October to January, I started calling and just telling the people who I was. I wanted to explain the facility of Resurrection Cemetery, and I'd have an appointment. Well, then once I was there, I would tell him, I'm going to be here only a short time. If you have any questions, why? I'll finish in about 15 minutes. But I lucked out all the way through because people did not want to talk about this. It is not something that people say, well, here you're going to die, I'm going to put you here. But the fact that they knew how long I was going to be there encouraged them to listen a little bit. We left in January. By then, the first week in January of 51, I had set a national sales record. I was told it was a national sales record. I sold 17 contracts in 1 week. Yes, I made some money. We had a brand new 51 Buick Special. We had custom-made furniture. And so we left for San Antonio. And this is when I was leaving, I got a phone call from Mr. James Harrington, who was helping the Catholic Church develop Resurrection Cemetery. And the other one was in Kansas City, Missouri, the Mount Olivet Cemetery. And he wanted to know, I said, would you mind my asking you, why are you leaving? Is there something that is not, that you like? I said, no. He says, have you ever made this kind of money before that you're making? I said, not with a piece of paper and a pen. I said, and he said, well, you're going back to San Antonio now? I said, yes. He said, could you make, I said, well, I'm stopping in Peoria to see my in-laws and so on. He said, could you stop by Kansas City? I said, sure. So we stopped by there on the way down. He took us to the country club. We had wild game. It was just a beautiful place. And he kept asking me, he said, do you know what you're going to do when you get to San Antonio? I said, no. He said, well, why did you leave this where you made this money? I said, well, I have made more money than this. I had my own business before I came out of high school. I said, but never with just a pen and a contract. And he said, if there's anything that you need, he said, please give me a call. He says, I enjoyed talking with you. Took me to his home. I was there just a couple of days. And so we left on that basis. And he said, as we were leaving, he said, there's one thing you can do for me. He said, will you please check on this demographics for Corpus Christi? And he said, the church is called. They also want one of these cemeteries. I said, fine, I'm happy to do it. So I get back to San Antonio, and this going back to the early comment that I was ahead of my changes in life.
Right.
And when I arrived in San Antonio, my mother is crying, Dad is there, everybody's happy. But at the same time, Mother finally said, I have something for you. I said, well, what is it? He said, well, it's this envelope. But Mother, you do not know what it is. Why are you crying? He says, if you look at the address, it's the Army. And it was thick.
Right.
And I opened it up. I'm being recalled from Air Force Reserve to active duty in the Korean War. And I thought, oh my gosh, now I was just planning work, I was planning a life yet to start the family and so on. And I think that I had to report the next day. I think we got there on the weekend. And Monday I'm at Brooksfield. When I walked in there, I said, look, is there a possibility I can get an extension? He said, no. And he said, just walk over here, swear me in. And he said, we're going to save time. He says, we're going to issue your clothing. So I came back home with my duffel bag again.
Right.
And in the meantime, I thought, well, I'll get the work done for Mr. Harrington. So I did get to the library and looked up the diocese and population and so on.
Right.
And I called him back, I gave him the information. And he said, well, have you made up your mind what you're going to do? And I said, yes. I said, yes, Mr. Harrington. I said, so quickly? I said, oh, yeah. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going back in the Army. And there was a silence because he had not been able to go into the Army because he had a problem with his feet. And he said, would you repeat that? I said, I'm going back in the Army. I've been called back. He said, do you want to go back? Well, no, not really. He said, Francisco, with the record that you have of what you did in the military, why are you being called back? I said, Mr. Harrington, I don't know. I said, but I know I have my clothing and everything, and I'm supposed to get back there. And he would speak with his Missouri, slow, talk measured, you know.
Right.
And he said, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, I think I have 3 days that I'm put things together. And he said, would you meet me at the airport? I said, I'll let you know what time, what flight I'm arriving.
Okay.
So he flew in. We go into Brooksfield, and it was either a full colonel or one-star general that we ended up talking to. And Mr. Harrington starts talking to him, and he said, I'm Bud Harrington. He called him Bud. He said, I'm Bud Harrington. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. I could almost hear him talking this way. And he said, I understand that Mr. Vega is being called back to Korea. And this fellow was straight back, and he said, that is correct. And he said, well, he says, I'm here to ask if you can give him an extension. He says, no, we cannot do that. And he said, well, how about sometimes we can straighten out his personal affairs? He said, no, sir, we cannot do that. He said, Mr. Harrington said, may I use your phone? So then he picks up the phone. I'm trying to keep from smiling or laughing only because of what then followed. He called and starts talking to someone. He says, this is Bud Harrington. He said, I think he said Harry there. And then he started talking. And he said, oh, fine, fine. He said, I guess Mulebach Hotel was part of his family, Harrington's family. And there's a well-known name, Mulebach Brewery and wealth and so. Well, pretty soon, this officer who was in charge, he got the drift as what might be the person at the end of the line. And it took me a little while longer, but then this officer, he kept telling Mr. Harrington, you know, that's all right, that's fine, that's fine. You didn't want any part of it. And then Mr. Harrington said something, oh, you want to talk to him? And this really got this officer quite concerned. And Mr. Harrington said, no, I think we've got it taken care of. So that was ended. To this day, all I know is that whoever was at the end of the line was important to the moment there. When I got the extension of 30 days, and I did some more work for Mr. Harrington. Mr. Harrington told me, he said, here's what this man has made. He's still working for me. He just got this demographics. So he was telling the truth. So I get that extension. I still only had a certain number of days. all the furniture we had bought, by the way, had not arrived in San Antonio. They finally found the truck had gone into a ditch, and it was all ruined. It had been underwater for some time. But we went, then from there, the last weekend that I was had to report on a Monday, I told my wife, look, I just want some time by myself. I'm going fishing. So I went to the outskirts of San Antonio River, or one of the rivers, and I had a fly rod, which I had not used in years, and I don't even have bait on there. I just have a knot on it to get the line out. And while I'm sitting out there, this fellow comes from along the river, and it's not populated on it. And he's in like work clothes, their clothes like army stuff. And he stops and he walks a little bit closer again. He was started about a half a block away when I saw him. He finally gets close enough, and he sits there. I didn't say anything. I had my own self-pity or whatever it was at that moment, or anger. Usually it's anger with me that I let myself get into situations like that. And finally he said, do you have a cigarette? And I didn't want to talk to anybody. I said, yes, I was smoking at the time. So I gave him a cigarette, and he moves away. He said, you have a match? I gave him a match, and then I said, look, would you mind leaving me alone? I said, I don't want to be rude, but I'm out here. I'm just going over something that I have to go over in my own mind. Well, he lit a cigarette and smoked, and as he's leaving, he said, when you get there tomorrow, say you ask for this person. And I let out a stream of profanity to this guy. So you'll leave me alone. Bum, what are you, just mind your own business. So anyway, he left. When I go there to report the next morning, the first sergeant said, please go into the office with the officers there. And I walked in, and this fellow from the river was sitting there. Now, how this came about, I have had even experiences with even less an explanation at Omaha Beach. That I got through a lot of stuff. But here's another one that came, and he said, this is for you, the orders. He said, you do not have to report. Says you were called up by mistake.
Oh.
And I said, how many people are you calling up by mistake? And he said, if I were you, I'd get out of here. He says, you're no longer, you're in the reserve, you're back in the reserve. So I walked out. And I stayed in there just long enough for that term to end. Then I did not sign up again. But I did want to get a commission. And that's why I stayed in there. But that was the end of my time in service.
Right. Now, who do you think was the person on the other end of that telephone when Mr. Harrington was calling? Who might it have been?
I would say it was Harry Truman.
And
they have known each other. Harry Truman had his offices in a suite and so on at Millbach Hotel. So this is why I never asked Mr. Harrington, because later on I went back to work with him on that. But it was such an unusual thing I wouldn't ask on that. I mean, I respected the guy, and I thought, but that's why I thought he was calling. That's who that officer thought he was calling. It took me a little while to catch on, but very unusual things that I've experienced, and like this fellow coming along the river. I mean, how did he know that I must have said something to him. For him to tell me, he says, when you go there, it says you ask for this person. Well, I didn't ask for anyone. I just went in because I didn't believe that this guy was anyone that could help me anyway.
Kind of a strange business. So once you had that sorted out, then did you go and work for Mr. Harrington then? Was that the upshot of that, since you didn't have to stay in the Army?
No, I gave Mr. Harrington the information. My sister and I started talking about doing something in business, and she said, well, let me show you something. He said, I've been making these, there were sandals, flat with, made for the toweling cloth, what do they call that?
Like a terry cloth?
Pardon?
Terry cloth?
Terry cloth. They were made from that. It was like you just slipped them, and they were making them. And she had the machine there at the house. She was doing that for them. And I said, how long have you been doing this? Oh, he said, anytime I want to, I just get some work on this. he said, but I want to tell you something else that I believe we can do. He said, do you remember the Rizik brothers? R-I-Z-I-K. We grew up with them. These were Syrian, Lebanese, I don't not recall.
Okay.
They're Middle Eastern people. And he said, sure, Mike and Teresa, and we had been in elementary school. He said, well, he says, I think we can get some work from them. I said, well, how much work? He says, why don't you go and talk to them? So I went downtown. It was a juvenile manufacturing company. They owned a building that took up the entire block. It was about 4 or 5 stories high. And inside, it was all embroidery, all manufacturing of clothing and so on.
Right.
So I walked in with Mike, and he said, well, he says, how is your mother and the family and so on? Fine. I said, my sister is doing some machine embroidery. And he said, thought that I might be able to get some work from it for her, for us. And he said, well, what do you have? What kind of work? So I took out some samples on that. And he said, you can do this here? I said, yes. He said, we're sending all this stuff out to Dallas. So we cannot get somebody who can do this. And it was just simply, well, it could be a number of things, but the samples that I took were just a little piece of cloth. It had the face like of a cat in one line drawing. It was like a cartoon deal.
Right.
And it could be done in a matter of seconds, 15 seconds or so. It was a chain stitch, like the machine that you use for putting a name on. So he said, I can give you quite a bit of business on this. He said, okay. And I said, please put it in writing. So fine, you put it in writing. And I go back home, and I said, well, I've got a letter here that will give us about as much business as we can handle. And I asked my sister, what do we need? He said, well, we better get 2 more machines, or get 1 more machine. And we took a room that was adjacent to the garage on that and started working on that. I go back to Mike, and he said, okay, he said, I have an order, I'll have it delivered for you. He sends out the beginning of 140,000 dozen.
Wow.
I think we finished 40,000 at $1 a dozen. Not 140,000, 40,000 dozen at $1 a dozen. And then we would just take this. My sister started training other people that had graduated with her from the technical school, San Antonio Tech, and we started getting them out. We would just give them flat pieces.
Right.
That's just developed into, we're doing anything that was printed. We could put in an embroidery.
Embroidery, right.
I had people that had Santa Gertrudis cattle. It was a new breed that was developed. And they wanted for shows, and we would take a 4x8 piece of felt, blue felt or white felt, and embroider the photograph right on there. And of course, that was very good money on that. These people treated this cattle like children, you know. That was their pride and joy and the breeding and everything that went with it. But we got into working with furniture manufacturers for the inside of caskets. So we got into volume on that. By then, we had 3 shifts working on that. And then Mr. Herring called me and he said, could you break away and come up for a weekend? I said, sure. So my wife stayed in Peoria. By then we had our first child. And I went to Kansas City. And Mr. Herring said, look, I have Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. And he said, I'm not getting the results. I have Grand Rapids. I have Kansas City. Right. And now, Mr. Harrington had on banks, automobile distributorships, Kaiser Fraser. Right. He was a business person. Right. And he said, would you be interested in just checking out and see if you can tell these guys how you made your sales? I said, Mr. Harrington, I just asked the people if I can explain the services that we have. So I started there in Kansas City, and first thing I had to do, I went in our first meeting, there's a fellow puts his feet up on the table, and he has a small knife and cleaning his fingernails. And first thing I said, well, I says, I think, would you wait till after the meeting if you want to talk with me? I said, you've been fired. So the rest of them got the drift. They started listening, and we started getting sales. Then Mr. Harrington said, well, how would you like to handle the sales contract? I said, Mr. Harrington, I've got a Nympha and Company, this business there, embroidery. I said, let me talk to my sister. My sister and I talked, and she said, well, if you want to stay, it'll be fine. I said, okay. why don't you take my share of the company for $1? We had all kinds of equipment, machines. We had power cutting tools. We had many things going.
So that was all still in San Antonio, though, right?
All in San Antonio.
Okay. And so why were you up in Peoria at that point?
At this point, I had come back to Peoria to talk with my wife, and she was also in agreement. And so then I just went back to Kansas City. And whatever I had in San Antonio, stayed there for quite a while. But I started then hiring and training the people for Albany, Schenectady, Troy cemeteries, for the Grand Rapids. And then there was a change. Harry Groff wanted to return to Kansas City. And Mr. Harrington asked me, he said, well, look, says, you have any suggestions about who do we put in there? I said, Mr. Harrington, how about me? And he said, why do you want to go there? And Kansas City, it's a big operation. And I said, I like the fishing, I like the hunting. I don't like the cloudy days, he says, but I think my wife would also like it. She was born in Idaho, but raised in Peoria, in Illinois. And she always talked about these changes of climate.
So, she liked having seasons.
We came back to Grand Rapids. Again, George Hartwell had just moved to Grand Rapids from Detroit, and he was heading Citizens Mortgage on that. He was a graduate attorney, but then he went to the mortgage business. And again, just like we had lost brothers, and we had enjoyed many fishing trips, many hunting trips. The family came along, and it's been a very nice experience there. So that about brings me up to working with you and the great job that you're doing.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on in then and finishing the story for us.
Very good. Thank you very much again.
Okay. All right. We can switch these off, and we can tell Tom he gets away with his 1-hour tape this time.
There are so many things that keep coming up. Even when I was writing this morning, that I know I've made notes for writing a book because there's so many sides that come up. I remember seeing this guy. The guy said they're complimenting this. I guess he was a medic. I already came back from Sherbrooke, and trying to find. And here's this guy said, "Look what this guy did! Look what this guy did!" And he took a pen, and of course the pens we used at that time had a rubber cartridge inside, and he stuck it in the guy for him to breathe.
Right, make it tracheotomy that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had never seen anything like that. And then they took him out. There's another incident. They had a display here in Grand Rapids. A photographer. He has his offices in the Amway. Of veterans of 5 wars. They had the display in Lansing. They had it in Holland. When the one in Holland we went there, they had it in a mall. And as we're watching, this man comes up to me. He says, I saw your photograph and the information that you have there. He says, I just want to tell you, I was with the medical corps. And he says, we were in England, and they were bringing back as many pieces that they could find, as many bodies, as many other wounded and so on. And he says, the guys that they were bringing back that could talk, and this is the way he put it, he said, no bastards are getting out alive. They're being chopped up. And it was Omaha Beach on that. But he said, and when he was telling this in Holland, he started tearing on that. And he said, was that true? I said, yeah. So but these are things that, until I gave my first talk on this at the Michigan Military Historians, and my wife was there, I had never talked about it. There was no need for it, because I'm not the only one there. This is what bothers me at times when I read stories that have been written and written, and these people were not there. And they're not telling the truth. And I'm not about to get up and challenge all this money on there, but I think in an opportunity like this, I'll tell you what I can recall.
Right. Well, what has happened is that in the past 20 years or so, the people who sort of write military history and that kind of thing and study it, they recognize that there's really an awful lot to be learned from the veterans, and that if you have the chance to go and talk to them, you can do it. Now, you have to always be careful because memory will play tricks on you, or you can confuse things here or there. But what I find in doing this is that there's a lot of things that really stick in someone's head. So the image is there. There's something they saw. There's something they experienced. And if you can replace it at all or connect it, then you have something that's as authentic or more authentic than whatever else you're going to get.
Well, when you talk about images, I'm talking to you with this whole set over here of images that I have not talked about. I mean, of things like this piece of dealing with this guy. The one guy committed suicide, and this is in Chantilly. And the material, by then I was a personnel sergeant major, and I saw the adjutant says, check this out. This is for the records. And there was a letter that the fellow had written, left there, and he said, things are so rough, we're getting shot up. There was nothing of that. Not in Chantilly. I mean, we had. I was on guard when this one German officer came marching down at night, but not the kind of fighting we had been experiencing before.
Right.
Like I said, we were in combat. We were for 18 months. We were being strafed for all of this stuff, but nothing like like the beginning. And this fellow had written this letter to be sent home. Now, he was one of about 4 or 5 guys that were constantly. They lived in a separate area where we were. There was barbed wire on them all the time. This one with like cuts, deal. And they had guards. Guards with dogs. They were escorted.
Yeah, we did finish.
Are you done? Okay.
Yes.
I was like, oh my gosh, where's the sound?
Yeah.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah, only 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.